Hello, thank you all for joining us. My name is Julie Bureau, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at New York City DOT, leading the BQE Corridor Vision. I'm joined today by our consultants from the BQE joint venture, Bahish Chansey and David Vega Barakowitz of WXY Studio, and Jeremy Siegel of the Bjarke Ingels Group, who will be my co-presenters. Today, we are excited to share progress that our team has been making since the last round of feedback and to provide everyone with a refined series of design ideas and concepts for BQE Central. We'll start this presentation with a brief discussion of the overall process for this project. At the request of many community members, this will also include a video that provides an overview of the environmental review process that will apply to BQE Central effort. After we lay the shared foundation, we're going to quickly recap what we heard in our last 2 rounds of engagement. Finally, we will walk through a series of design concept updates that have been developed since our last round of workshops based on your input. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank so many of you who have participated in this process to date. Thank you to our elected officials, and I want to share my gratitude for the Community Visioning Council, focus group participants, and community partners who have been so dedicated and spent so much time and effort on this process. And of course, a deep thank you to all of you who choose to spend your evenings with us at these workshops, speaking up for the best possible outcomes for your neighborhoods. Today is not the moment to make a final decision. We are sharing refined concepts and want to understand your initial responses. You will continue to have opportunities in small groups, public meetings, and through the environmental review process to continue to weigh in. This administration is focused on pursuing a long-term fix for the city-owned portion of the BQE in Brooklyn, including the triple cantilever, which is highlighted here in dark blue with a number 4, while taking a bold, corridor-wide approach to address the entire structure and reconnect communities throughout Brooklyn divided by this highway. You're focusing on the urgency of maintaining a safe city-owned section while reimagining the entire corridor with consideration for sustainable design and centering equity. Moreover, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to leverage federal dollars to make these needed repairs and improvements. Our overall timeline is ambitious and is being driven by the anticipated spring 2023 grants that we'd like to apply for and the overall environmental review and approval timeline. We don't want to miss this once-in-a-generation opportunity to access transformative federal infrastructure dollars for New Yorkers during the current administration. And most importantly, this project only succeeds through a community-driven process, one that is inclusive, transparent, and consistent. Here we're showing where we are in our parallel schedule for BQE Central and BQE North and South. Before I walk through BQE Central in detail, I want to note that we are also making progress on the initiatives on the Brooklyn BQE corridor. For BQE North and South, we completed the first rounds of workshops, mirroring the central process. Currently, our community partners are leading grassroots efforts to gather feedback from their communities, and our next workshop series will take place in late March. New York City DOT and our sister agencies remain laser focused on delivering safety and public space improvements on city-owned properties along the BQE beginning this year, and will apply for related federal grants in 2023. And on freight diversion, City Hall has kicked off a multi-agency effort to explore viable alternative routes for freight to reduce truck traffic, including on the BQE, such as maritime, last mile, and rail solutions. We are on track with our BQE Central engagement, and I'm going to zoom in a bit on where we are in that process. As you know, we have completed the first and second round of workshops and stakeholder meetings. And we are in our 3rd round now, which began with our in-person meeting on Tuesday, February 28th, and continued with our virtual meeting on March 2nd, the purpose of which is to share or find design ideas with the community. We're here to listen to your feedback about how these developed concepts resonate with or correspond to community priorities. We will assess your feedback alongside other technical considerations and values underpinning our project focus to define the project options to move through environmental review. In BQE Central Workshop 2, we've presented concepts that prioritized as narrow a roadway as possible while building to modern safety standards, and Bahij will share more about these considerations shortly. In response, we heard clearly from you that it's important that we assess a 2-lane as well as a 3-lane configuration, and that's how we'll proceed, to study both options for environmental review. This will require extensive traffic studies and modeling and ongoing coordination with our state and federal partners, lengthening the amount of time we will need to prepare for environmental review. This will also allow us to seek additional feedback from Brooklyn Bridge Park leadership and survey park users for concept feedback during the park's busiest seasons. This means we are adjusting our schedule by a few months. Instead of beginning environmental review in spring 2023, we anticipate we will begin the process as early as the autumn of 2023, a process through which there will be additional opportunities for community feedback. The schedule has been adjusted accordingly with finalization of design and construction beginning in early 2027. I want to be clear that New York City DOT is prepared to apply for federal infrastructure grants this year for BQE Central, and we'll pursue these funds with a competitive application. Throughout this process, we've heard a deep desire from our community to better understand the environmental review process, its purpose, and opportunities for public engagement. We've created a brief explainer video to summarize the process, which we're going to play for everyone now.
The Brooklyn-Queens Expressway Corridor Vision, BQE Central. BQE Central is a 1.5-mile section of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway from the Atlantic Avenue Interchange to the Sand Street Interchange. It has multiple bridge structures, including the historic triple cantilever, as well as ramps and retaining walls. The New York City Department of Transportation is leading a comprehensive community engagement process to plan for the safe, modern, and resilient structure we need. Once a community-driven concept is refined, the next step in the project will be an environmental review compliant with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. That process will last about 2 years and includes several opportunities for community feedback. NEPA requires federal agencies to examine the potential effects of their policies and programs on the built and natural environment. DOT will seek approval by the Federal Highway Administration for the design and funding of BQE Central, and therefore the project must comply with NEPA and other related federal, state, and local regulations. Consistent with NEPA, a federal agency must clearly identify the purpose, need, and objectives for a proposed action, a reasonable range of alternatives for the action, and the environmental impacts of the action on the built and natural environment. The NEPA process can take the form of a categorical exclusion, environmental assessment, or EA, or environmental impact statement, or EIS. Based on the requirements of NEPA, DOT expects to conduct an EIS for BQE Central. An EIS is the most rigorous level of review under NEPA. NEPA requires that the public have meaningful opportunity to provide input into the scope of the analysis and the environmental impacts and related mitigation measures presented in the environmental document, either a draft EA or EIS. As part of the NEPA environmental review, DOT will also meet requirements of the New York City Environmental Quality Review or SEQR process. SEQR requires city agencies to assess, disclose, and mitigate, to the extent practicable, the significant environmental consequences of their decisions in order to meet the description within the SEQR Technical Manual, Chapter 1. Following the comprehensive community engagement process, DOT will initiate the environmental review in the fall of 2023. We expect the NEPA EIS will take approximately 2 years. Once the environmental review is complete, DOT and our contractors will complete design and begin implementation. DOT will support ongoing monitoring and repairs throughout the process. To learn about the progress on BQE Central, visit nyc.gov/BQE. New York City Department of Transportation, copyright NYC DOT, 2023.
If you'd like to learn more about the environmental review process and have the opportunity to ask other questions on your mind, please join us in spring for a Hot Topics Q&A webinar. Registration information will be available at nyc.gov/BQE. As we've said from the start of this project, our goal is to hear from as many people as possible. In addition to our active Community Visioning Council, we are working with 18 community partners who were selected to support a broad-based outreach strategy along the corridor. These partners are spreading the word about the project and connecting directly with their own constituents and networks through local events, activities, and organizing. In January and February, we also hosted a series of topical working groups with subject matter experts to discuss significant policy questions related to safety, traffic, transportation, and mobility, connectivity, accessibility, and the public realm, environmental justice, and land use and economic development. Focus groups explored the deeper policy trade-offs and opportunities that need to be explored in this process and helped us understand how to reframe the BQE from a multidisciplinary perspective. A summary of findings can be found on our website at nyc.gov/BQE. Our community partners are busy getting out the word to their constituents and began planning their first series of events in January. We're anticipating 55 events this March and April and are excited to absorb this community feedback on the future of the BQE. Following our last workshop, DOT released an online survey focused on BQE Central. Nearly 1,900 people responded to the survey, which was online from mid-December to mid-January, and helped us to get additional feedback on how people view the BQE's local and regional impacts and opportunities. The majority of respondents who took the survey were from downtown Brooklyn, and most people who took the survey expressed concerns about traffic congestion and traffic safety, along with significant questions and concerns about bike and pedestrian safety, noise and air pollution, and resiliency. 16% of respondents focused on prioritizing mode shift through bike and pedestrian enhancements or removing the highway. 34% mentioned bringing the third lane back as a top priority. 30% cited traffic congestion as a major problem in this portion of the BQE, and the remainder focused on a variety of matters. Generally, survey results mirrored feedback we heard in community meetings, but there was a greater focus on concern for congestion. A similar survey covering BQE North and South is live until Sunday the 5th at 10 p.m. and available via our BQE website. I'll now turn it over to Bahish Chansey of WXY Studio to provide an overview of what we heard during our last rounds of engagement.
Thank you, Julie. As Julie mentioned, we are now in our third round of engagement for BQE Central. Throughout this process, we have received a tremendous amount of feedback in virtual and in-person meetings, the online survey, and small stakeholder meetings. These ranged from concerns around traffic and safety to a desire to explore opportunities for new parks, transit infrastructure, and neighborhood connections. In December, approximately 500 people participated in an in-person and virtual meeting for round 2 to help us shape the vision and provide feedback on a menu of ideas for BQE Central. We heard a lot of specific feedback about the concepts we presented, as well as a lot of constructive ideas about how to help people evaluate trade-offs, provide more transparent information, and better explain core design and engineering terms. Specifically, our team heard a lot of feedback about how BQE Central integrates with other regional initiatives and considerations, including how the city can better organize regional freight movement, including increasing off-hour deliveries and maritime freight, efforts to address vehicle miles traveled with an emphasis on reducing trucks in environmental justice communities, ensuring that construction impacts are well communicated, especially to lessen impacts to small businesses. And finally, ensuring that maintenance planning is central to all investments. Following our last round of engagement, we wanted to provide a fuller explanation of how the project is addressing several key community focuses, including the overall potential roadway width and the number of lanes possible for BQE Central, how the project affirms and supports the city's climate adaptation strategy, how we as a city and you as stakeholders in this process can support a transparent decision-making process that clearly illustrates trade-offs, and how this project reflects an equitable and balanced approach to planning and investment throughout the Brooklyn corridor and the city more broadly. In our last round of meetings, our team presented concepts that represented a roadway width of approximately 40 feet and had 2 travel lanes and a shoulder. I should mention that this reflects the roadway width in one direction, Staten Island bound or Queens bound. The specific width of the roadway is something that cannot be predetermined in this part of the process and will require state and federal approval and input in accordance with safety standards. However, we fell short in explaining how these potential widths relate to what is there now and how those numbers add up. When the BQE was built in 1948, parkways and early highways were built to the applicable standards of the time, what we would now consider to be substandard modern highway design elements. This includes narrower 10.5-foot lanes, merging conditions, and other features that over time have presented unsafe and uncomfortable driving conditions. Since 1948, safety standards have evolved considerably based on ongoing analysis of and experience operating highways throughout the country. While older roadways in New York City retain these substandard features today, when roadways are rebuilt, the current standard lane width of 12 feet plus shoulders is typically required. In 2021, when the BQE Cantilever was converted from 3 10.5-foot lanes to 2 12-foot lanes, drivers noticed improvements to merging conditions at the Staten Island-bound entrance at Columbia Street and the Queens-bound entrance at Atlantic Avenue. And what had been a constrained condition also felt more comfortable due to the addition of an inside shoulder. However, after the two-lane conversion, data comparing traffic speeds in 2021 and 2022 show significantly decreased traffic speeds on the highway and in most surrounding neighborhoods, some up to 30 to 50% slower, including neighborhoods not adjacent to BQE Central. Bus speeds on local routes also declined by 5 to 10% as compared to 2019. This degree of decreased speeds was not seen in most neighborhoods across the city during this time period, despite a citywide trend towards increased personal vehicle use and e-commerce. For a long-term fix to the cantilever, we are evaluating the potential for either a two-lane roadway built to modern safety standards or a three-lane roadway built to modern safety standards. In the two-lane configuration, in addition to two 12-foot lanes, we would propose shoulders on the inside and outside for safety, resulting in a 38 to 44-foot roadway, along with appropriate provisions for merging for traffic from the ramps. I quote a range here, 38 to 44 feet, because the two shoulders at federal standard width add up to 20 feet, but the city could pursue deviations from the Federal Highway Administration to allow for narrower shoulders. We understand that there are highways in New York City where people regularly experience more constrained and substandard lane and shoulder widths. However, improving safety is critical, and such exceptions are infrequently granted for new or rehabilitated highways. As part of our BQE Central studies, we must consider the upstream and downstream impacts of diverted traffic on other communities. In our traffic analysis this spring and summer, we will assess how lane configuration will impact surrounding neighborhoods along the BQE corridor. In a three-lane configuration, there would be three 12-foot lanes with shoulders on both sides, resulting in a 50 to 56-foot wide roadway, again with maximum 20-foot shoulders total. In both cases, due to frequent on and off ramps, the BQE will have different characteristics at different points along the corridor. All of the concepts shown today work in both a 2- and 3-lane configuration, but are illustrated as a 2-lane, 40-foot roadway, as we did in the last workshop. We are prioritizing safety within this project, although we must remain flexible in certain constrained locations where there is limited potential to increase the width, such as when the BQE goes under the Brooklyn Bridge. For comparison, here's what the existing 2-lane configuration looks like as compared to a standardized 2-lane and 3-lane configuration. To recap, DOT is committed to studying both 2- and 3-lane roadway configurations. We are required to study current traffic demand and potential demand in the future. We will incorporate known plans into our analysis, such as congestion pricing, to assess how a 2-lane or 3-lane capacity meets the needed demand through the project limits. This will also help us to understand the potential resulting effects now and in the future across the entire BQE corridor in Brooklyn. In coordination with the New York State Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration, the New York City Department of Transportation is developing the study requirements, and the final decision about this section of interstate will be made with our federal and state partners through the environmental review process. The study will start in the coming months while other documentation is also completed, after which we will update the public of the results. Environmental review is anticipated to begin as early as fall 2023 in coordination with our state and federal partners. Following our previous presentation, many people asked for further explanation of the partial versus full replacement options. A partial replacement approach would maintain the existing retaining walls of the triple cantilever, but create a new frame structure in conjunction with repairs to the retaining walls to increase the lifespan of the structure. This means construction would have lesser implications for adjacent properties, but also do less to mitigate the vibrations they currently experience. This approach also reduces the flexibility in how the framed structure is configured. A full replacement approach would replace the existing retaining wall, resulting in a completely separated roadway structure from the wall supporting the bluff, likely doing more to mitigate vibrations in surrounding communities. This also allows for greater flexibility for any new structure. We promised to come back to you today to speak about the construction process. While we can't describe an approach in detail before a design is further developed, we want to share high-level what would be under consideration. There are two possible approaches to a construction project like this: temporary bypass or traffic diversion. A temporary bypass requires building a temporary structure or structures that reroute traffic off of BQE Central to allow the BQE to be under construction. Depending on the length of bypass, it could take around 1 year to build and be in service for 2 to 3 years, with less time for shorter segments. This means a bypass would shorten the length of construction, but would create larger temporary structures adjacent to Brooklyn Bridge Park and adjacent buildings. And as we've said from day one, DOT will not build a temporary bypass at grade with the promenade or with Brooklyn Bridge Park. On the other hand, traffic diversion requires ongoing overnight closures for nighttime construction and regular weekend shutdowns. Our modeling shows that such diversion would increase local traffic significantly and require truck detours via local streets that are truck routes. This approach would also result in longer construction durations and potentially limit the flexibility of concepts in certain areas. It's important to consider that either option could be applied to portions of BQE Central, but would not necessarily need to be uniform throughout. However, when a temporary bypass is not used, overnight and weekend diversions will increase. During our outreach, many people wanted to see climate action reflected more prominently across all our proposals. DOT is investigating opportunities to integrate approaches that promote environmental sustainability, encourage mode shift and greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and explore opportunities for sustainable freight and goods movement. DOT is already working with agency partners to encourage truck electrification, cargo bikes, and maritime freight, while advocating for necessary state legislative changes and pursuing federal grants for additional support. The city is also keenly aware of the potential impact that congestion pricing may have on BQE drivers, though its impact is unlikely to result in traffic evaporation without more aggressive approaches to reduce demand. Many of these big ideas need to be explored in the context of the city's larger climate strategy, and we look forward to sharing these solutions with you as the design process progresses. Lastly, participants have expressed a shared interest in better understanding the trade-offs that will be considered in this decision-making process from both the city's perspective and the community's. We understand that not everyone goes into a process with the same priorities and that each individual evaluates a project based on a different set of inputs and ideals. A handout is available with a list of these considerations and some related questions we are considering for you to keep in mind as you view and discuss concepts today. As we go forward in this process, the city will be balancing multiple priorities and striving to create a clear understanding of how we're evaluating trade-offs so that you can grasp the inherent trade-offs of each approach from your own perspective. I'd now like to hand it over to my colleague, David Biga-Barakowitz, who will introduce the design concepts.
Thank you, Bahish. Based on the comprehensive feedback that we received during the last round of workshops, the design team has been working over the past couple of months to advance a refined set of concepts for community review and discussion. As we go through each concept, we will provide an overview of what was shown previously, a summary of what you liked and didn't like. Then we will illustrate a refined concept with an emphasis on showing eye-level perspectives to help you understand how these spaces might feel at a pedestrian scale. And as we move beyond this phase, we'll present some of the trade-offs of each concept. Before we do, it's worth restating that one of the core goals in the BQE Central project is to balance the regional need for transportation infrastructure within the reality of a dense urban neighborhood. We want to work with you to explore strategies that overcome the highway as a physical barrier between downtown Brooklyn, Brooklyn Heights, DUMBO, and the waterfront, and highlight ways of transforming it into an inviting gateway to Brooklyn's downtown, waterfront, and historic neighborhoods. For each design concept, we will zoom into one of 5 focus areas, moving from the triple cantilever to the remaining sections. I'll now invite Jeremy Siegel from Bjarke Engels Group to walk everyone through our latest design concepts for the triple cantilever.
Thank you, David. So during our last workshop in December, we presented 3 different approaches to the triple cantilever section of the BQE: the terraces, the lookout, and the stoop. In going through these concepts, we heard a lot of constructive feedback and some very specific questions related to the engineering, impacts, and trade-offs of each of these concepts. We also heard an appetite to better understand these concepts at a more experiential level, with a focus on how each works at specific pinch points and existing views. After presenting a menu of design studies, many people expressed feedback and concerns about designs that would place pedestrians in close contact with traffic, have repetitive circulation and experience, and produce non-standard roadway features. We digested that feedback and have used the past several months to refine our design approach and clarify some of these questions. Today, we will present updates on the 3 concepts from the last workshop. We will begin with terraces, then discuss the lookout, and finally provide an updated design concept for the stoop. Of these 3 concepts, the open space approach for the terraces and the lookout can work in both a partial and a full replacement. The last option, the stoop, can only work as a full replacement. In the graphics shown tonight, the terraces have been illustrated with a partial replacement of structure, while the stoop and the lookout are both shown as complete replacements of the structure. Today, we want to hear from you what you like about each of these open space strategies, since elements of all of these concepts can be adopted in a further refined design. As we shared at our last meeting, during our first round of outreach, many people expressed they wanted to see a design that would achieve something similar to what was illustrated in the BQ Park concept, which was depicted as a fully covered roadway running through Brooklyn Bridge Park along Furman Street, with an open space covering the entire length of the corridor. Through in-depth review of the BQ Park proposal, several challenges were identified for both 2-lane and 3-lane configurations, including roadway geometry limitations, physical infrastructure conflicts with private property, building foundations, MTA infrastructure, and utilities. To capture the spirit of the BQ Park proposal, the team has been exploring concepts with partial tunnels and decking, including the stoop, which has similar benefits, including additional open space, less visible roadway structure, while meeting geometry standards. This and other concepts have been presented publicly and continue to be refined. All of these concepts meet several key goals, including creating new linkages between the promenade and Brooklyn Bridge Park, building off of the design language established by the park, and reducing the visual impact of the highway to the greatest extent possible. Partial or full tunnels for the roadway have also been a consistent theme we've heard expressed. In order to ensure that the concepts we present today are feasible, we have worked hand in hand with the team's engineers to conduct extensive modeling and calculations, and want to share this extensive work with you. At a glance, throughout the process, we have used existing structural models and created preliminary models for the potential concepts using bridge information modeling systems, as well as structural analysis models, samples of which are on the screen. We have also completed preliminary efforts to ensure that the proposed concepts are designed to code standards and will likely pass design code reviews. We also performed a preliminary fatal flaw analysis. This included assessing potential conflicts with surrounding infrastructure, right-of-way, and utilities, a basic review of roadway widths and safety considerations, and a conceptual review of bridge types and structural configurations. The team tailored its fatal flaw review to each concept. For instance, the stoop is wider than the terraces or the lookout, and a roadway profile review was completed to ensure feasibility of the concept shown. It is important to note that the final configurations of open space may have design impacts and will continue to be carefully considered. We will continue our design development as we refine the concepts to ensure that traffic and safety are appropriately addressed. During our last workshop, we presented the terraces in combination with a partial replacement of the structure. We noted that the terraces, as a partial replacement that reuses the existing retaining walls of the structure, could have an open space approach that follows the stepped profile of the new roadway. Many people expressed concerns about the proximity of these open spaces to traffic and were unclear how these potential open spaces could connect to existing pedestrian corridors, which we aim to address in this refined concept. Throughout our outreach, we consistently heard how important it is for us to better connect people to the major pedestrian routes and transit nodes in Brooklyn Heights, especially Cranberry Street with access to the A train, Clark Street with access to the 2 and 3 trains, and Montague Street, which connects to the R, 4, and 5 trains. These pedestrian desire lines inspired our refined approach. Using these key pedestrian routes as a starting point and ramping downward, the team adopted a design that brings 2 standard accessible ramps together from the promenade all the way to Furman Street, where the berms of Brooklyn Bridge Park have an arrival plaza at Clark Street. At Clark Street in Brooklyn Heights, a series of steps cascades directly down into the park, emphasizing one of the most important access points between Brooklyn Heights, downtown Brooklyn, and Brooklyn Bridge Park. This approach worked to limit any impacts to the existing berms of Brooklyn Bridge Park while lessening the visual presence of the highway as seen from both the promenade and the park. To make this approach work, further study of ventilation, life, and safety requirements for the structure would be required during the design process. While we believe that this design approach could work, we want to acknowledge that provisions for natural ventilation spaced at intervals will be required in any partial tunnel greater than 300 feet in length. In this design approach, the terraces could form a stepped landscape that parallels the contours of the roadway, minimizing the impact to the existing berms while maximizing access from the promenade to the park. The terraces themselves could have a generous planting that winds down the steep slope, similar to a new park space designed for the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which has similarly steep slopes, but offers an intimate landscape experience for pedestrians along its winding paths. Looking towards Brooklyn Heights at Clark Street, these terraces limit the visual impact of the structure between the berms, while fostering a unique approach that integrates landscape and transportation infrastructure, while also allowing air to pass through the structure at the sides. From within Brooklyn Bridge Park, pedestrians would look towards a new access route to the promenade at Clark Street, offering a more direct connection from the park to the neighborhood and the subway. On the terraces themselves, the design might feel like a stepped amphitheater oriented out towards the East River over Furman Street, serving as a multifunctional space for sitting, lounging, exercise, and travel. At the promenade level, the view across the river to Lower Manhattan would be preserved and could maintain an additional buffer for planting and seating, while preserving the elements of the promenade design that people know today. The terraces themselves would mitigate sound from below the promenade, likely with ventilation at regular intervals based on further engineering analysis and design. Looking south along Furman Street, the underside of the structure could be highly sculptural, presenting opportunities for lighting and artwork that could make this one of Brooklyn's more unique open spaces from below. The sloped profile of the structure would still allow for light to pass under the structure to reach Furman Street. Please note that more extensive street-level views of Furman Street, including at Gerolman Street, have been made available as part of breakout table materials. During Workshop 2, the lookout concept was presented in combination with the full replacement of the structure. Similar to the terraces, the design team wanted to explore ways of establishing a stronger connection from the park to the promenade at each of the key routes for pedestrians at Cranberry Street, Clark Street, and Montague Street. Whereas in the terraces concept, the design idea focused on bringing the promenade down into the park via converging ramps, in the lookout, the design focuses on bringing Brooklyn Bridge Park up to the promenade. This approach would modify or replace components of the existing Brooklyn Bridge Park berms, creating a direct landscape connection up to the promenade at 3 major access points. This connection would need to account for access to the existing utilities and weight load constraints on the utilities themselves running along Furman Street. The concept would build on the existing berms that are currently in Brooklyn Bridge Park and transform them into multifunctional planted and foreground landscapes that translate the best aspects of Brooklyn Bridge Park to the level of the promenade. This landscape would build on the elements of the park landscape present today, but expand their functionality and use them as a strategy to limit the visual impact of the highway. At the promenade level, the existing pedestrian pathway could be widened strategically while preserving the experience offered by the promenade today. Viewed along Furman Street, the underside of the berms would meet the replacement structure with the new retaining wall, preserving access into the park at key points and access to utilities along the street, such as the DEP interceptor. During the last workshop, the design team presented the stoop as an option that could bring the roadways down to a single level, allowing for a wider open space on top in a limited area of 150 feet. This concept was carefully considered as a way of translating some of the design elements of BQ Park, but adapted to the existing constraints of the corridor and the need to have the structure in a stacked configuration at Drollman Street. Where the roadway comes down to one level, the promenade could extend and slope down into a broad stoop overlooking the skyline and Brooklyn Bridge Park. Similar to the other concepts, pedestrian access would connect to the major pedestrian routes in Brooklyn Heights, guiding people towards the center of the promenade and the central berm of Brooklyn Bridge Park. This would create a design concept in which the promenade and the park meet near the flattest, lowest point in the middle of the roadway structure. While this design approach would expose more of the highway structure itself due to the braiding and unbraiding of the roadways, the stoop could reimagine the experience of the promenade as an expansive step plaza looking out on the East River, linked to a sloping hill that seamlessly blends into Brooklyn Bridge Park at its midpoint. This approach would enable a more gradual transition into the park at a limited section where the roadways run parallel. Similar to the lookout, the stoop could rebuild or structurally modify Brooklyn Bridge Park's existing berms. This design approach would combine an urban amphitheater with broad sloping hills and landscapes that blend into the park below. Because the stoop merges down to a single level, it could potentially have a greater direct impact on the park and have more exposed structure, elements that could be mitigated through the design process. From the park, the effect would be much the same as the lookout, with an enlarged central berm that connects up to the promenade. Because this option would be less steep, the experience above the single-level roadway could feel more expansive and less confined to ramps, as shown in the previous options. That more gentle transition would be clearly felt at the level of the promenade. At Furman Street, the overall structure would have a larger footprint in the park where the roadway runs parallel, but could be further mitigated through the design process. So as a team, we're confident that the terraces, the lookout, and the stoop can all deliver a combination of safety improvements, a longer structural lifespan, and unique approaches to enhancing open spaces and connectivity. While these three approaches are all technically feasible, it's worth emphasizing that there are distinct differences in approach that will need to be refined as we move forward. In summary, the terraces would form a stepped landscape with long converging ramps down to Brooklyn Bridge Park, minimizing the impact to the existing park and berms, while maximizing access from the promenade down to the park. The lookout, by contrast, looks at bringing Brooklyn Bridge Park up to the promenade by creating a direct landscape connection to the promenade at 3 major access points, while preserving the linear experience offered by the promenade today. And the stoop aims to bring the roadway to a single level, creating a significant wide open space on a limited stretch of covered roadway. This would allow the promenade to extend and slope down into Brooklyn Bridge Park. While the terraces and the lookout open space concepts work as a partial or full replacement, the stoop only works as a full replacement. That said, if specific open space ideas in the stoop are appealing, there may be ways of achieving them in the other two concepts. Each of these approaches has a different level of impact on Brooklyn Bridge Park and would require different trade-offs during construction. As we move forward in the process, we want to hear from you what elements of each approach are exciting and what you think should be de-emphasized. The workshop today will also provide a forum for asking our team more detailed questions related to each concept. I'd now like to pass back to my colleague David Vega-Barakowitz, who will walk us through the design changes through the remainder of BQE Central.
Thank you, Jeremy. Before we move on to discussing the other potential concepts north of the Triple Cantilever, I want to note that tonight's meeting will not focus on Atlantic Avenue. During our last meeting, we shared 3 high-level concepts for Atlantic Avenue that focused on reconnecting Van Voorhees Park by standardizing the on and off ramps of the BQE at this location. These ideas focused on one potential approach to standardization of the existing highway on and off ramps. As illustrated, this version did not fully address the competing traffic needs of the interchange, along with the bike and pedestrian safety and access challenges that exist today. Since the workshop, DOT has also met with local stakeholders who voiced concerns about safety, congestion, and impacts to local businesses, and shared new interesting ideas to address competing priorities. We want to deliver on the best possible solutions for this complicated interchange, and we need more time to get it right. We are continuing to develop concepts for the entire Atlantic Avenue interchange, and our team is currently working through several potential approaches that we hope to show in a separate public meeting this spring. These options would all consider improvements for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers along Atlantic itself, improvements to the entrance to Brooklyn Bridge Park, standardized and reconfigured on-off ramps, and potential enhancements to Van Voorhees Park. We will be announcing the timing of the meeting soon, and we'll share more information in the weeks ahead. While the Triple Cantilever is one of the most challenging aspects of the project from an engineering perspective, many of the most significant opportunities for enhancing the gateway to Brooklyn lie north of the Triple Cantilever structure. During round 2, we showed 3 different ideas for how the area around Columbia Heights and Squibb Park could be reimagined as a community-focused node with improvements to the surrounding streetscape parks and more direct links to the promenade. These ideas were well received, and we received a range of suggestions related to balancing community needs with public access, questions about the extent of the structure over the BQE, and opportunities for accessibility improvements. Today, the area around Columbia Heights represents an important cluster of community amenities and is the most direct link between Brooklyn Bridge Park and Brooklyn Heights via the Squibb Park Bridge. In looking at opportunities at this intersection, we saw a clear chance to connect this cluster of community parks while creating a stronger connection to Brooklyn Bridge Park and creating a more seamless link to the promenade. To enhance access, the connection into Squibb Park could be reconfigured as an accessible pedestrian path and linked to Harry Chapin Playground and Hillside Dog Run via a raised crosswalk. Additional seating and planting could ensure that these areas complement existing and surrounding vegetation. As part of this, the design could extend the area over the BQE as a lookout with a more direct connection to the promenade and the Fruit Street sitting area. A second concept might explore leaving room for a potential community amenity at Squibb Park. Here is an existing view of Columbia Heights from above. The first concept could enhance Squibb Park and create stronger connections between the parks while enhancing safety, while the second could leave ample room for future community amenities in Squibb Park. Here is an existing view of Squibb Park looking north. The park could be more heavily planted with seating, amenities, and more robust programming, as well as other elements that could make the space more inviting. A new fully ADA accessible serpentine bridge would bring people down through the park into a wooded grove, and this could be a bridge or integrated into the landscape itself. Please note that any enhancements to parkland shown this evening would be developed by New York City Parks. Here you can see a view of the street at Columbia Heights looking north today. The potential streetscape would strive to link the three parks together and create a pedestrian-oriented zone using a raised crosswalk, pavers, and sidewalk enhancements. We'll now move north to look at the potential transformations of the area around Old Fulton Street and Anchorage Plaza. During our last round of workshops, we heard a lot of positive feedback about ideas for Old Fulton Street and Anchorage Plaza. Participants appreciated focused improvements to pedestrian safety and were encouraged by the potential ramp closure being explored at York Street and the enhanced public access and connections under the BQE. Today, the areas around Anchorage Plaza, Old Fulton Street, and the BQE feel distinctly like a series of vehicle on-off ramps, creating significant conflicts between tourists, residents, cars, and bikes. Parks in these areas are generally underutilized, and the BQE acts as a barrier between the Fulton Ferry District, Brooklyn Heights, downtown Brooklyn, and DUMBO. The potential design could reimagine Anchorage Plaza as a gateway to Brooklyn, eliminating complex islands, potentially closing the York Street off-ramp, and reclaiming it as a public space, opening Ash Alley as a direct pedestrian crossing under the bridge, creating a new direct connection under the BQE from Anchorage Plaza to York Street, and enhancing Washington Street and the surrounding parks as pedestrian-oriented streets with direct connections to DUMBO. The reconfiguration of the BQE opens up new opportunities to re-envision the streetscape surrounding the Brooklyn Bridge. In the potential configuration illustrated here, DOT could replace complex traffic islands with a sequence of pedestrian plazas that create a more contiguous experience for residents and visitors while enhancing safety and connectivity in and around the bridge. Here is a bird's eye view of Anchorage Plaza as it exists today, and a view illustrating how that sequence of public spaces could serve as a gateway to the Fulton Ferry District, DUMBO, and the waterfront. Today, Ash Alley and Anchorage Plaza are inaccessible to the public. This pedestrian view shows how Ash Alley could potentially be reopened and how Anchorage Plaza could be reimagined as a major pedestrian route with pop-up programs, markets, planting, and seating. On the north side of Anchorage Plaza today, there is an inaccessible staging and construction zone. We have an opportunity to reimagine that area as a public plaza while maintaining space for maintenance and repairs to the Brooklyn Bridge that will be needed over time. Along the BQE itself, we could explore a new connection underneath the structure to York Street while looking at opportunities for pop-up activities and events similar to those that occur under the Manhattan Bridge today. Today, Washington Street is an important link to DUMBO, but has few pedestrian amenities. Washington Street could be reimagined as a welcoming gateway to DUMBO with pedestrian-oriented streetscape elements that guide people to the waterfront. Similar to Old Fulton Street and Anchorage Plaza, the area in and around the Manhattan Bridge, Trinity Park, and Farragut houses today feels disconnected and unwelcoming and can be challenging to navigate. We presented a variety of ideas for how to improve those conditions at our last meeting and heard excitement about new pedestrian and bike connections, as well as support for direct vehicle connection from the Manhattan Bridge to the BQE, which would relieve local streets of truck traffic. Today, this area suffers from a lack of connectivity, underutilized open spaces, and frequent double parking. A potential new vehicular connection could significantly improve how vehicles get on and off the BQE while relieving local streets of truck traffic and congestion. A potential plan for this area could be coordinated with a series of improvements to the surrounding park spaces, including pedestrian and bike access routes, newly programmed park spaces, and a potential street grade crossing at Nassau Street. In combination with these open space improvements and a direct link to the BQE, a potential direct connection across Nassau Street could be possible, reconnecting the grid at a critical juncture. Here's an aerial view of this area facing downtown Brooklyn. Potential improvements would strive to resolve the challenges that trucks and traffic face in the area, while also reimagining these spaces as a community node that connects the Farragut houses to DUMBO and the waterfront. Facing the parks, currently the parks in this area have a significant number of cars that park along the street and feel unsafe and unwelcoming. Logical connections between streets are difficult to discern if they exist at all. The potential condition would emphasize connectivity under the highway and over Flatbush, making this entire area into connective tissue between neighborhoods while also limiting truck traffic on local streets. With the addition of a new on-ramp, the design would need to reimagine the view down Flatbush and ensure the bridge design preserves as much of the view of the Manhattan Bridge as possible, while enhancing this as a gateway as part of the design for new ramps and bridges. A direct pedestrian connection at Nassau Street would help balance the needs of local pedestrians with those of regional traffic. At Prospect Street and Lyons Park, the streetscape could be enhanced with pedestrian amenities that link park spaces and ensure a safe, inviting connection through the neighborhood from DUMBO and Brooklyn Heights all the way to the Farragut houses and the Brooklyn Navy Yard. In total, these collective improvements have the potential to restore many of the connections that were lost when the BQE was originally built, while creating new benefits for regional traffic and crafting a necklace of inviting community spaces that can link all the way from the Farragut houses in Vinegar Hill to DUMBO and Fulton Ferry District to Brooklyn Heights and Cobble Hill. Once completed, these investments in BQE Central could add significant new connections over and under the BQE, a wide swath of enhanced streets, parks, and public spaces, and a range of critical highway safety and pedestrian improvements. We are committed to working with you to ensure that these strategies and benefits are distributed throughout the entire corridor in a balanced way and implemented holistically to improve access, safety, and connectivity across one of Brooklyn's most significant gateways. Thank you.